detailed list of the incentives is a little further down. The density bonus is probably assumed to be the first incentive that a developer would pick, because that allows them to actually spread the cost of the affordable units over a larger group. And this particular section is designed to match state density bonus law, and that was one of the directives that the board gave us in the beginning. So we actually have done that. And Section C has additional alternatives, again, as per the incentives that were provided in Section 040. If a developer is allowed to have 2 or more incentives, this is part of a list of that they can choose from. Inclusionary housing plan. This ordinance asks for an inclusionary housing plan to be developed when a developer comes in to do a development agreement, and it will discuss what they're going to do, how the formula is calculated, and all that. That section discusses the details of how that would work. Section 055 is the eligibility required for occupancy of inclusionary units. And again, we're talking about, since the county itself does not build housing and does not qualify people, it would be a designated agency, perhaps CDC or RCHDC, who would qualify people that are in their programs, and that those are the people that would go into the affordable units. Equity sharing, this is a procedure. One of the Supervisor Smith had asked if we could have an example of how that would work. You'll see an example in there. This is a simplified example that I put in the packet. The sample equity sharing documents that were in your last packet have some more complicated structures of how that would be. The equity sharing provision allows for whoever is actually building the housing. Many of their programs for funding have specific requirements for how equity sharing has to work, and there's a provision in the equity sharing section that would allow requirements for funding sources to use their formula, whatever their formula is. Otherwise, it would go forward in a similar form as the example that we provided for you. The rest, there's several other sections that talk about owner-occupied units, the trust fund, adjustments and waivers. The adjustment, waivers, and modifications allows the board freedom to adjust any of this when they deem necessary. At one point, there was a little bit of discussion about well, what would happen if it's just not feasible to do this work. And it allows the board to do that. And then the severability is a legal section that's in there. So.
Any questions from board members? Okay.
Okay, Allison Glass, the Assistant CEO. So where we are is, this is the framework. This is a fairly standard framework for inclusionary housing ordinances, and we really tried to label each section and to make it as clear as possible. So at this point, I know there's public comment. What we would like to walk out of here with from the board would be direction as to which sections or any specific items, but I think we're not looking for a line-by-line review, but kind of an overall sense of where you want us to go and a process that you'd like us to follow, and then we would bring it back in time frame. The equity sharing example is the last page in your packet if you wanted to look at that. So.
Which I think in today's economy is a poor example.
I beg your pardon?
Which I think by today's economy is a poor example.
Oh, okay.
That assumes about a 7% increase in equity every year. I don't think we're seeing that now. Anyways, members of the public, Dwayne Hill, you want to come forward, please?
Good morning. I'm Dwayne Hill. I've participated in some of these meetings. I say some of these meetings because I haven't been a very committed committee member, I must admit. But for the last 3 years, it seems like I heard 6 meetings mentioned. It seems like there's been 60, but it's it's been discussed for a long time, and I want to lend my voice to support the inclusionary housing ordinances. You know, Fort Bragg's had an ordinance for a couple of years. There's a number of them around the state. There's been a lot of studies made to, that support the need and the outcome of positive outcome of these ordinances. Being in the affordable housing business for 35 years, what I've seen is property became scarce, more scarce in Mendocino County. Developers tended to not want to build what I'd call a moderate income home. You don't see 1,200 square foot homes built anymore because land is so scarce and so expensive. Everybody's trying to optimize their property, the size of the house, get as much money for it as they can. We are profit, most of us are profit motivated, and I understand that, but the downside has been we don't see any Oak Manor type developments, have not for years, and I don't see that changing. I don't see any more land being made, and I see more of the same, despite what's going on in the housing economy this last year. But so I support this, continue to support it. I think it's a good idea, and thanks for giving me a few minutes to talk about it.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hill, other than general support for the ordinance, do you have specific modifications that you would recommend? Or any concerns
No,
about?
I don't, John. I'm not prepared to do that. I have not read the most current version. Haven't attended the last 3 or 4 meetings. I apologize for that, but that's the truth, and so no, I don't.
Thank you.
Kimberly, do you have a question on Mr. Hill? No. Oh, you have a comment? You want to comment now?
Well, mine.
Okay. Lisa?
Quite a few comments.
Okay,
but mine
Lisa
can
Helly.
continue.
Good morning, Supervisors. Lisa Hilligas from Legal Services of Northern California, representing Dottie Copeland et al. In the new Superior Court action for lack of implementation of the housing element. I'm actually excited today that you have an opportunity to look at this and give guidance back to the planning team, because what I think that was presented to you in December offered a solid framework for an inclusionary zoning ordinance, but it lacks the details and the meaning that is intended, I think, not only by the housing element, but what the Housing Task Force was worked on for nearly 5 years, and what the planning team, I think, would like to see as a model for an inclusionary zoning ordinance that could be effective and dynamic. What you saw in December was what I would call a compromise, and it certainly was compromised further in its integrity. Specifically, the integrity was compromised at the final vote for the inclusionary zoning ordinance. And I think that the integrity of its intention and purpose was severely compromised. So I welcome this opportunity, and I encourage you to look at how you can improve this ordinance and make it so that we will actually get some units built once it has been approved and is applied. I'm grateful that the planning team